Welcome to Mmusi's podcast. Welcome to your podcast.
Great to be here.
Today we're doing things slightly differently because we want to talk about education and BOSA's education policy and what should be done differently. So the first question I want to pose to you is, what in your opinion is the point of a school education?
Look, if there's a mantra for the next 30 years, it should be educate, educate, educate. The intrinsic value of education is, of course, developing young people who can think, who develop critical skills, who are able to, for themselves, charter a way for their own development. And maybe that's part of the intrinsic bit. It's the self-image. It's the ability to say, you in yourself, it gives you a sense of esteem. The better educated you are, the more you can transact in the world, whether it's decoding what happens. But I have a vision for the extrinsic value of education. This is the extrinsic part says, where are young people's contribution to society, both economically, socially, and culturally? And the vision for education must be that we must have young people who are able to compete with anyone in the world. We must have young people who are able to participate in economy, not just as employees, but as employers. We must be able to have thinkers who put together concepts and ideas that shape our cultural beliefs for the future. Therefore, if you really have a passion and a deep sense of why we need education, you must appreciate its own intrinsic and extrinsic value. And I think for me, there must be a different view for what we want to see with our young people in our country.
That's what I was going to ask you next. So if that is the point, your answer is basically the point of having an education. You've just encapsulated that. Do you think the education our young kids are getting offers that?
Well, I say it often enough to say that, as you've heard the famous saying, the proof of the pudding is in its eating. The proof of education is in its employment. And currently at the moment, we've now got over 11 million young people not in education, not in employment, not in training, which is typically called NEETs. Secondly, we have, if you're a young person in this country, 2 out of 3 young people will not be able to find employment, which means the majority of our young people are not only unemployed, but they're unemployable. The third dynamic is we've got young people who sometimes don't even have the basic skills, not only to offer the economy, but to be able to even participate in international benchmarking. And you see that even in primary school when you read Tim's reports, and that in fact our young people, when they hit the age of 10, cannot read for meaning. Which means that in some ways our education system is creating young people who are going to be state dependent for the majority of their lives. And that is a crisis. It means that you are setting up a state that will perpetually, as today sits at 60% is paid to the social wage, you are just going to increase that. You're just going to make sure that young people are wholly dependent on all aspects of government, whether it be grants, whether it be healthcare, any other facility, they're going to be dependent on it. And I dare think that we need to intersect that to be able to transform. The thing about apartheid was that it demeaned the life of particularly Africans by miseducating them, offering
and
them
deliberately so.
a Bantu education system. It then perpetuated this idea that young people needed to come into the economy simply as laborers. So that's why you gave them Afrikaans as a medium of instructions, because the belief was that Africans, black Africans, would come into the workspace as farmers, to work within the farm. Now, we have to transition that and ask ourselves the question, if we want to fix the legacy of apartheid, if we want to build a government that is competent, if we want to compete with the Asian tigers who themselves recognize that human development is a fundamental pillar of any society that is developing, we have to fix our education system. We have to ensure that our education system develops our young people to compete so that they're no longer just farm workers or anything, or machine, what is the industrial economy workers, that they'll sit and pack shelves, etc.
Yeah.
But that these are young people who can innovate, who can be scientists, doctors, lawyers, but even in the skills sector, they're able to compete with anyone in the world. I think the opportunity is immense. Africa is the future of the world. I want to say that over and over again, because I think the developed economies are struggling. They're struggling for land mass. That's why a particular president now wants to gain Greenland. They are struggling in many ways for growth in certain aspects, and population decline. They're projecting that even China's economy will decline over the next number of years. Africa, we are growing. We have the median age of 23. We're expecting 1.4 billion people in this continent. This is where it's going to be. And if we're going to maximize that opportunity, not only of population dividend, spatial dividends, but ultimately making sure economic development, Africa is where it's at, and we've got to educate our young people for that.
You have been very vocal against the 30% pass mark. Why?
The department basically says to deem a child proficient to get a national senior certificate, and I'm not talking about the bachelor's pass, I'll talk about that in a moment. You need to pass 3 subjects at 30%, and then mother tongue and a few others. Imagine you yourself saying to someone, you are proficient in a subject at 30%. They make the claim to say, no, not all of us are gifted the same. But I'm saying to them, yes, I accept that point. But the point I want to make is that even within that, there's still a demand for standards so that we can keep improving the quality of education of our young people. Therefore, I can't see anyone proficient at 30%. Universities, certainly when you look at the bachelor's pass, they upweight that to say, well, that can be at 40 or 50% respectively. I'm saying everybody must pass at 50%, because when you do that, you hold teachers accountable to teach better. You upweigh the standard of education. And thirdly, even if the young person makes a deliberate decision to say they're going to go into skills and vocational training, you still would want a plumber who's proficient in maths or whatever at 50%. So I think, to me, it is a lack of ambition. It is saying, let's just get these young people through. And that's why, when you look at it even now, 52% of the young people passed at that level.
Do you think it's fair to the kids who are not academic to have that standard?
I think that it is fair to ask anybody to achieve a higher standard. That does not mean you have to be an academic. It means that you have to strive for better. Because when you go into, for example, IEB schools, and maybe quintile 5 schools, the high fee paying schools, there's a genuinely accepted standard that asks that even if you are not an academic student, you need to be taught at 50%. You need to achieve 50%. And when the child is not academic, we give them multiple pathways as to what we want to do. Whether they're going to go and become a hairdresser, but I would hope that they're able to have some financial literacy to be able to manage that business. So yes, not everybody's going to go to university. I'm not asking for philosophers and people who go into university. That is one stream. But even in vocational training, even in all aspects, we need to be able to uplift the standards.
I feel you hit the nail on the head there with, we need to equip young people to go into the world, because even if you start your own small business, okay, then you are going to need your maths for your accounting and things like that. But even if you're just doing a household budget, you still need the basics of maths. You still need a proper understanding, and more so than 30% of maths.
The other thing that it does is that it masks the real quality of education, right? It tells the department to say, well, we can pass people at this level, and it increases that. It brings it up to 87% because now we are all making the case, well, more people pass. But it isn't true, because in fact, they are passing it. If you set the bar so low and many people get over it, it doesn't mean that you've achieved something. It just means you've lowered the bar.
It's more of an achievement to not make it.
Whereas, and also, I think there's a confidence dynamic in this issue. You know, there's a pride when you are able to say, when somebody wakes you up and says, you're going to achieve 50% of this, and you kick off and you do it. There were certain subjects when I was at school I was not proficient at, didn't enjoy, I didn't have the aptitude for it, I wasn't streamed for them. But you know, the standards were set in such a way that I pursued achieving them, and I worked hard. It builds your own confidence when you're able to do that. I think if we continue this 30% proficiency level, it is tantamount to rendering our young people colorblind in a world of color. We are saying, go into the world, it is full of color, but you can only see only a few.
Yeah. What about the curriculum? How does focusing on the end goal change the quality of the content that's being taught?
Totally, because it achieves that second question, which is the extrinsic value of education.
Yeah.
The extrinsic value of an education links itself to the fourth and the fifth industrial economy.
Okay.
The fourth and the fifth industrial economy is not just going to be about the provision of the information technology or the internet, but it's going to answer the question, what is the Internet of Things?
Okay.
Today we are talking artificial intelligence, we're talking generative AI, this is the global conversation. For our young people to participate in that, we have to skill them, particularly in maths and science, to be able to get into that space. And when you look at this current matric year, you will discover very well that the population of young people who wrote mathematics and science is declining. And secondly, even though you might have got more distinctions in mathematics, the average mark in science has in fact dropped.
Okay.
And were you to assess on two of those subjects at 50%, you discover that the pass overall is less. So we are not, as a society globally, if we need the full skills, we need to be able to say to ourselves, are we building an economy where people can compete? Because in truth, the way economies are now structured, particularly in a world post the 90s that has become fast globalized, is that you and I are not competing for a job with our neighbor who lives in the same street, but we're competing for a job with someone who's in Bangladesh, who's in India, who's in China, because the manufacturing works in that way. And therefore, if we can't equip our young people to do that, we're setting them up to be globally in trouble.
Well, I know you've been quite vocal about critical thinking. And also, I mean, I always think about creative thinking as well, because we don't even know, I mean, you've got young kids, Sam, I've got young kids. We don't even know what jobs will be, the jobs that they will be doing when they are in their 20s and 30s haven't even been invented yet. I mean, when we were kids at school, who knew the internet would be who knew that e-commerce would be a thing? There was no such thing as that.
Sure.
So,
it's one of the things I regret. You know, when I was at school, we were given a choice. They said, do you want to do typing or do you want to do woodwork? And the girls did typing and the boys did woodwork. I wish I would have done it the other way around. Not that the girls should do woodwork. The point is, we all now need typing. And therefore, to the metaphor of typing, what is the thing that we need today?
Yeah.
And I would make the case to say, keeping a subject like life orientation on the table doesn't in fact help for that long-term question. It feels to me like life orientation is today's woodwork.
What would you replace it with?
Critical skills, critical creative thinking curriculum that helps young people interact with what the world looks like, where the skills they need for cognition, for competence, so that they're able to say, in the future, we are resilient enough to be able to chart our own path, as it were. And I think that's what I would replace it with. And focus the educators in being able to do that. And I think technology allows us the space to do so.
Let's talk about parents and parents' responsibility in the education of our kids.
It's a very close bit for me. I'm a father of 3 kids. My daughter has just started high school this year. My son is finishing primary school, and I've got a little one who is at an ECD preparing to go to school.
He's bringing up the rear.
She's the boss of the house. And so But what do I do for my kids when it comes to education? You know, it's been a long time since I've done grade 8 curriculum, so I couldn't be any help there.
I couldn't even be helped with grade 1 maths.
But we offer the support, we offer the presence, and research proves the fact that if a child is going to not only start school and finish school, there has to be at least one responsible adult at home who's able to keep the lodestar and the support for that child. Now, I accept the fact that we're privileged. My wife does a lot with our kids. She's a teacher herself. But I want to say this categorically, that we are living in a society where, as a function of the dysfunctional homes, some of our households are broken. We've got too many, you know, the majority of children registered in this country at new births are registered to single mothers. There's a profound absence of fathers in the home. Part of the reason why I think young people drop out of school is because of the lack of that support, the lack of that infrastructure that makes sure the child has eaten before they go to school, or there's some support. So fixing of the family is an imperative to supporting young people, particularly in schools, when we contemplate the fact that it does indeed take a village to raise a child. And I would argue that a partnership between parents and the school will develop young people who have values, because that's what happens in the home. They translate values, and education transmits the pedagogy or the learning bit, so that the kids are able to develop further. So you cannot underscore the role that parents have. And I think, you know, I was listening the other day to an interview, and it's that even the role and the presence of fathers can be as commensurate as having of both parents. And I think it matters. And I want to say to the men out there, it's a drama I want to keep beating. If we want young boys who are going to be responsible adults, men, we got to step it up. We got to be home. We got to make sure our kids get to school. And we've got to make sure that we do everything that we can, that those young people's education is protected.
It's an interesting statistic in South Africa for a couple of years now, where it's a lot of boys are dropping out. So it used to be teenage pregnancy, the girl would drop out and wouldn't go back. It's looking more and more now like girls have baby, leave it with their mom, or leave it with a carer, leave it with whoever, and go back. Because it's like, it seems like the young teenage girls know, this is my way out. However, the boys are the ones who are dropping out. I was speaking to a teacher the other day, and she said it's the boys they're worried about. The girls will come back. The girls know this is, you know, they've got to go through. Yeah. What is your message to teenage boys? Because you are also, I mean, it's not like you came from a place of privilege.
No,
You came from, you know, from Soweto. You didn't go to the private school route yourself. You worked your way through.
Look, I was most grateful that above any other thing, my parents understood. My father would say to us, I'd rather go without socks than you go to school. My high school fees, we were one of the generation that was in the ex-Model C school. So they were way out of my parents' price bracket. There were times I couldn't afford high school fees. I literally couldn't. My mother was working as a cashier, and then for some of the time she was unemployed. But they hustled. They hustled their way through to make sure that I could stay in school. And yeah, sure, I didn't have the latest technology. I wasn't able to do all the other stuff. But in truth, their commitment to sticking it out was crucial. Now, young boys, I think we're going to have, and this is not to say it diminishes the take a girl child or focus on the girl child conversation. Both things can be equally true.
Yeah.
But I think we have a crisis amongst young men and young boys. I think that we're starting to see even suicide rates increase in that level. And I think we've got to be, as a society, be thinking on one level, how do we produce role models that are able to say, you know, right now I'm finishing studying a doctorate, and one of the things I want to do is to go back to our community and say, I was in the same streets as you. You used to get out, we can get all the way through. That's the first thing. But the second thing is, what additional support do we give, particularly to young boys? And that's why this year, one of the things I'm really committed to doing is setting up a mentorship program for young boys. Because I think if you can translate those values or transmit those values, what is not reformed, what is not transformed is transferred. So when you have young people who come from broken homes, who have a low self-esteem, whose only family is gangs and that kind of social influence, they're going to transfer that.
I think it's also looking up to gangsters. These are the guys with cars and money and all of that. So it almost becomes an aspirational.
We've got to step up. We got to step up. If there's a story that I think is brewing in the next number of years, and I say this boldly as a black man, we need to stand. We need to step up. We need to step up. I can only speak from my own vantage point, and I'm not saying white is better or anything. I'm just merely speaking to us as a community, as black families, and I'm saying as men, we need to step up. We need to step up at home. We need to step up at work. We need to demonstrate the fact that there's a different pathway, and for those who have made it, it's our time to contribute. For those who have shown some success, we got to contribute. For the next generation is looking up to us. They'll either look up to gangsters, they'll either look up to criminals, or they can look up to people who they say, sure, this person stuck the course, they studied, they are working, they're entrepreneurs. You know, when I grew up, fair enough, apartheid was well institutionalized, and therefore Group Areas Act was part of it. And apartheid was evil. There's nothing to glorify about it. But nothing changes the fact that in my community, people like Agri Klaste, who was the editor of the Sowetan, were living down the road. The headmasters lived around in the neighborhood. It would not be abnormal for you to, if you wanted to grab a cigarette and walk down the road, there was a probability that your teacher, your principal, could bust you in the same community because you lived in the same community. And now suddenly it created that sort of social capital that frames your existence. And it doesn't, I had an incredible soccer coach who coached us in primary school. And I'm so grateful that we had a community that played sport. Sports coaches, they matter. Yeah, there are predatory ones. I'm not, but we can't judge the entire ecosystem on that basis. Tennis coaches, soccer coaches, netball coaches, all of that. Create sport for young people.
Yeah.
If we don't do that, in our communities, I can tell you we are in the process of losing a generation. I was so grateful I was involved with even church. Just that gave me a place where values could be taught to me. And that's why I want to say to even church leaders, don't ever miss the mark of thinking that your program that reaches to young people is a waste of time. Because I can tell you, we know from research, if we were doing something with young people on a Friday afternoon, it would take them away from shebeens. It would take them away from, which once you've got young people away from shebeens, it not only decreases the violent crimes that take place in many of our communities, because we know they take place on a Friday afternoon, most of the time, and we know that alcohol is a significant contributor. Let us reset our values. Let us reset our communities by inducting values. And therefore, whether it be church, whether it be sports clubs, whether it be civil society, whether it be in the home, we've got to be present.
I think that people underestimate sport. Sport, obviously, it's recreation for kids. It gives them a healthy body, a healthy mind, all of that. But particularly team sports, I believe, teaches not only resilience, because the more you practice, the better you get. And that is something that a skill, an intrinsic skill you take out into the workforce with you. You don't get this right, try a bit harder, try something else. But most importantly, it teaches the skill of teamwork, and teamwork in a work environment. And that is, it's something you can't teach too late. It's something you will walk into a job having it as part of the fiber of your being is teamwork. So you get on with things instead of now coming and how do you work with people. That collaborative process is already part of the way you navigate the world.
You know, one of the conversations I had with the current Minister of Education, and she alluded to me, Severe, in the most eloquent way. She said, one of the reasons young people drop out is because they fail. And when they fail, there's no one to tell them to try again. What sport teaches you is that you'll lose sometimes.
Yeah. But
But it doesn't
mean it's
mean
over.
the game is done. It doesn't mean
go.
that. You got to,
Yeah.
you know, I played football, and my goodness, we would cry after every loss. I played tennis. I would be the kid sitting in the corner crying after every loss. I hated losing. But it was important that even after I've lost, you get up, you go back and you play again. You play the next game, you play the next set, you play the next match, you do whatever. Now I've got a son who plays football.
Daniel.
And Daniel often will, fortunately he's in a very good team, but they
He's
often,
such a cute
from
kid.
time to time, they'll come back and they would have lost. And I get to pick him up from that soccer match and talk him through failure, talk him through the idea that what are the mistakes that he can learn from and what he can do. And sport gives you just that sense of learning how to fail forward.
Fail forward. I like that. Fail forward. Teachers. We cannot talk about education without talking about teachers. And there was a big drama last year about thousands of teachers being retrenched, which again, you were very, very vocally against that. There's massive, I mean, look at the size of classrooms is growing tremendously, and the overcrowding is a huge problem. How do you propose we get around that idea of getting more teachers?
I mean, there can be no denying about the fact that, one, from a fiscal point of view, if you bloat the cabinet as an argument, that is 600 million rands that you put towards that goes towards additional cabinet posts, security, etc. But that's 600 million rands that you've just taken out of the education sector. Ask yourself the question, how many teachers those are? When you do, let's take, for argument's sake, the top 10 quintile 5 schools that we've got now, top 10. Many of them have got what would be called governing body posts. And that's how they keep up their classroom ratios less. Now, it's a privilege when public education you get to quintile 5. But in quintile 1, 2, and 3, which showed an improvement in the recent matric results, but what we cannot decline is the fact that in the midst of that, we still have a situation where we have overcrowded classrooms. We've got too many teachers who, in some instances, just simply can't work within a classroom of 70 kids. So what I would urge us to do is, one, we need to prize teachers.
Yeah.
We need to celebrate them. We need to reward them accordingly. That's on the first instance.
It's a vocation, and it's not something I wouldn't want to do.
No, I mean,
it's something. I mean, it should. Firstly, they should be paid a lot more, but also the idea of going and teaching kids. It's a difficult job.
the most impactful people in my life were teachers.
Always, yeah.
And many people would tell you the same.
Yeah.
My only point I would make about teachers is that in as much as we get behind teachers, but we also need teachers who are accountable.
Yeah.
We have two problems. We have a generational transition that's taking place at the moment. A lot of our teachers are aging and therefore moving out the system. We need to get younger teachers who are, you know, I mean, sometimes I laugh when I hear people say, oh, well, we got to teach our teachers to use technology. I'm like, technology is now part of the education system. You know, when I got to my daughter's school for her orientation, I was looking for a blackboard because I grew up with chalk and all of that. Those Uggs are using, you know, iPads. They are there. That's where they are.
Yeah.
There will be teachers who will not use blackboards. They will assume the internet is part of it. They will use AI as part of teaching.
Yeah.
So we are in the process of transitioning in that. I think, to me, so we need to get a new cohort of teachers coming through, but we need teachers who are accountable. You know, when the suspensions of the annual national assessments, thanks to union pressure, meant that for so much of our schooling, teachers have left themselves unaccountable. We need We need teachers. We need to be able to know, Fiona, if you are a teacher in your class, why are children failing?
Yeah.
You must be accountable for that.
Yeah.
Because there's something wrong with what you are doing. And we must hold you accountable for that. The unions can't protect you from that. Because it may very well be 30 to 50 children who come through your hands who can't do the basic competence in whatever subject you are teaching, who end up creating problems later on in life. Accountability is going to be crucial. And that's where the unions in some ways forget the fact that whilst they need to protect the basic rights of teachers, they are not there to prevent the basic assessment of teachers.
So, more teachers.
And that's one of the things from a budgeting point of view. I'm fighting with the Minister of Education to say, let's move money from cabinet and some of the work that we're doing about deploying troops everywhere and then bring them back towards teaching.
What about upskilling of teachers and training of teachers? And
like doctors have to do what is called a continuous development, and they get points for that. Teachers can do likewise. There's nothing stopping teachers from doing continuous development and assessments. This way, the teachers continually transitioning and entering more in the same as they are preparing people for the world of work. They are also working in a world that reflects that world.
yeah. The last question. In a nutshell, if you were made the education minister tomorrow, what are the things you would do immediately? In fact, what is BOSA's education policy in a nutshell?
Look, we've got to think about education from birth to career. If our kids are not eating before they get to school, their brain development is so impaired that sometimes it limits their capability going forward. So let's think hard about making sure that the child grant extends to in utero. This way you avoid malnutrition and you can ensure that children have eaten well. I agree with the current administration. It's something that we share as a policy position that ECDs must be capacitated. Because if you build good ECDs, you are able to make sure kids are better prepared for schooling. It's the luxury that those who go through there get. I would strengthen primary school education to make sure that children can read and introduce technology more. There's already technology that coaches children in terms of their own reading capability. I would furthermore from that ensure that we focus on effective infrastructure so that no child is learning under a tree and that we eradicate all this pet latrine nonsense. I would focus on particularly STEM subjects and narrow the curriculum redevelopment in that to make sure that the curriculum is beginning to improve and narrow children towards that. I would upweight obviously from 30 to 50% pass marks going into high school. And I will make sure that there's a system that allows for young people to be able to stream a bit earlier so that they're able to accelerate their competence in the areas they're passionate about. And so we can prepare those for university 1-2. And I think when we think about TVET colleges, we mustn't downplay. We mustn't say, you dropped out, go to a TVET.
No.
We must say you are skilled to be in a TVET, go do that, so that that skill can be further developed, whether it be in whatever the vocational training is. So I would reform their whole education system and think hard about what the extrinsic economic values are. And then the last thing I'd say is, we've got to sit in a multi-cluster format of government to say, what economy do we want to see? If our economy in the future is going to be, let me use one example. Here's a game changer for us. Think about the continent of Africa, you think about SADC. We're probably the only ones with the mineral resources to create the future of batteries and that type of energy. Well, if that's an economic game changer in the next 5-10 years, are we producing enough electrical engineers? Have we got PhDs focused on that? Are we developing the skills? And therefore, to achieve that, let us begin to create those skills going forward. Reform, reform, reform.
Mmusi Maimane, thank you very much. I hope the Education Minister watches this. In fact, I would hope that one day you would become the Education Minister.
No, we've got to fight. We've got to fight for an education system Because, look, what is the choice we have? If we don't educate, well, let's build welfare.
Yeah.
If we do educate, then let's enjoy freedom.
Build welfare is expensive. The bottom line is we cannot afford not to educate.
Yeah. If you want true freedom, educate your young people.
Yeah.
The ones who are living in freedom in this country are the educated ones. The ones who are not, I can't claim that to be freedom. Because as Chinua Achebe says, a hungry person cannot claim freedom.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Sure.